I should have been brave. I should have said, no, this isn't working. And I should have walked away. And I didn't.
Did Nicole Badera actually watch the interview? And the reason I ask that is he didn't show any remorse? Really? He actually did.
Then one of the biggest mistakes of my life, I pick her up. I put her back in the car.
We're going to discuss here the question of whether or not the interview that John Majors did with GMA actually worked.
On the night of March 25th, if you could relive that night.
I wouldn't have picked her up. I wouldn't have picked her up. I wouldn't have put her back in the car. I wouldn't have tried to keep her in the car. I would have gotten out that car and ran.
You know, in communication strategy, you do a lot of things and they may or may not actually work. The classic thing that happens in the media, the story structure is really what I want to talk about. Full disclosure, I am a sometimes freelancer for The Guardian. I love The Guardian. I think The Guardian is one of the best media platforms in the world. So they're a lot better at focusing on the facts than a lot of the American publications, quite frankly. They do lean left, and you see a little of that in this story. You'll notice with this story that it is marked analysis. You know, the other sort of way to, you know, do a political narrative in a news story is to mark something op-ed, editorial. This way we say whatever we want. We don't have to have any facts attached to it. We just say anything. You see this all the time because, quite frankly, opinion writing and strong opinion writing, you know, somebody with a very strong opinion, that gets a lot of traffic, and it doesn't cost anything. Nobody has to make a phone call. Nobody has to conduct an investigation. Nobody has to actually read or study anything. They can just be, oh, I'm talking about this thing that I want to talk about. I see a lot of times in a lot of publications, a lot of attention paid to, oh, this is an opinion, this is an analysis. Well, this particular writer, Andrew Lawrence, actually, if you look him up, he's a guy that focuses on sports. So I thought it was interesting that he was the person writing this article. I think these types of stories are not typically his forte, but that's not really why I'm here to talk about Andrew Lawrence. I'm just going to talk about story structure here, which is very, very common, where you have analysis and then you get some academic in the story talking about something, right? And I guess the reader is supposed to go, wow, it's somebody with a PhD talking about something, so they must be right. I guess that's what publications are thinking. In this particular story, they have a person that pops up. And, you know, I think it's pretty clear by what she says in the story that this is what I sort of call an agenda story, where we're trying to put an agenda out there. We're not trying to in any way analyze whether or not John Majors did something or didn't do something. We're trying to say he's wrong because of this thing. That's really the purpose of this piece. At the end of the day, you know, the entire writing and the entire piece is set up to say he's wrong. You know, how dare he go out and do this interview because he's wrong. And here's why he's wrong. And see, you almost can only have that structure. I wouldn't say only have that structure. It's a lot easier to have that journalistic structure in an analysis piece because we're just analyzing. We're not, you know, oh, this doesn't have to be objective. This doesn't have to do both sides or any of that. And as you can see in this generation of journalism, nobody wants to do both sides. They want to do how they feel. It's the feelings era of journalism, and how I feel is going to be infused into the facts that I tell you. And of course, the facts that I leave out. So in this particular thing, they have a PhD, which, as I say, is a classic character in these stories. Call up some college, you get somebody who talks about a certain subject matter in the way that you want it talked about. Nicole Badera in this case. Conversation featured hallmark tactics of Darvo. Okay, and so people are not familiar with Darvo. You should look on YouTube. There's a lot of explanations for it. What Darvo is an acronym, and it stands for Deny Attack Reverse Victim Offender, which is basically what I think she's a professor, Dr. Badera, is saying is, look, what Majors is really trying to do here is he's trying to deny everything. He's trying to attack Miss Jabbari, and he's trying to reverse this situation and make himself into the victim. Well, I sure as hell would love Ms. Badera to point out in this interview where exactly Mr. Majors attacks Miss Jabbari or criticizes Miss Jabbari, because I actually thought that he did a pretty good job of avoiding exactly that.
Yeah, the text from another woman. Again, I said at the beginning, I did that. I copped to it. I show her. And conversely, the impact of this is about responsibility.
And typically in these interviews, you do see that. Typically in these interviews, you do see some criticism. Someone gets accused, they feel like they did, say, hey, I didn't do it, I'm not guilty. And this is why I'm not guilty. And that usually does lead to an attack on someone making an allegation. But I don't remember when that was in the interview. Then again, maybe Miss Badera, like the rest of us, is confused. And I'm one of the people who's confused alongside of her, because there were 3 versions of this interview. The first version appeared on GMA and was I think it was a 6 or 7 minute segment. Then there was a second version, and there was a third version, which was quite long. And I looked at all 3, and I searched for the moment where he's attacking Miss Jabbari, and I did not find it.
Reporters at USA Today have found that since Trump took office, it's getting much worse. And now many schools are back to investigating 0 Title IX cases per year.
The denial is there, certainly, but I don't know that the attack is there. The reverse victim and an offender is an interesting phrase, because I think you could argue, when you're looking at a video of somebody getting chased down the street by somebody, that they might in fact be the victim of something. I mean, I just feel like if that was reversed, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. That's an interesting thing. And I think, again, we're slipping into an era of evidence doesn't mean anything. Facts don't mean anything. It's all about feelings. It's all about what I want to say, my narrative getting out. And whatever the facts are of the case, they don't matter. I also find it interesting, too, that, what Darvo seems to indicate is that anyone who says that they didn't do something is attacking. And anybody who says they didn't do something is trying to make themselves into the victim. Well, that's interesting, because every single week we get a story in the news of somebody who is getting exonerated after being in jail for a very, very long time. And typically that person is a Black male.
Chesapeake man has been exonerated after being convicted more than 40 years ago.
Reporter Megan Shin joins us now. And Megan, what did he have to say?
I wasn't going to give up. No.
For the first time in 40 years, Chesapeake native Roy Watford III is a free man.
Words of a wrongly convicted man determined to move on with his life. Maurice Hastings spent nearly 40 years in prison for a murder he did not commit, and he's finally free now.
He stands next to the flag of the state that wrongly convicted him of murder.
Mr. Hastings is now finally able to clear his name and walk free.
Maurice Hastings is now 69 years old.
It's a man who spent more than 40 years in prison for 3 murders he did not commit is now free. A Missouri judge ruled that Kevin Strickland, now 62 years old, was wrongfully convicted.
What does this moment mean to you?
Well, I can thank God to be alive and thank the Innocent Project and the Innocent Commission.
The judge and lawyers praised Denny for steadfastly maintaining his innocence over 3 long decades, even though making a false guilty plea would have meant an earlier release.
I almost lost myself along the way.
But he knew he was never with the 3 men.
How long were you in prison?
31 years, 9 months, 18 days, and 12 hours.
You have it down to the hours.
Yes, sir.
A Memphis, Tennessee jury convicted McKinney of burglary in 1978. The victim identified him as one of 2 men who attacked her in her bedroom. He was sentenced to 115 years. In 2008, DNA testing of evidence scientifically excluded McKinney as a suspect.
Conviction from 1976 in Westchester County overturned. The 72-year-old was exonerated by DNA, which made history as the oldest exoneration by DNA in the United States.
After 40 years, I'm finally going to get closer to this and clear my name.
In 1975, the Vietnam veteran was...
And Vincent served 44 years here at Louisiana State Penitentiary, but he was supposed to serve 100. That was the sentence. For the last 30 or so years, he kept trying to tell judges, I didn't get a fair trial, and here's the information, and they just dismissed him left and right. Get out of here, get out of here. Simmons had been in prison for 44 years and tried for most of that time to get his conviction overturned.
Petition is granted.
The end of Brian Banks' ordeal was marked by tears after a judge threw out the charge that had sent him to prison for more than 5 years.
It's interesting to listen to some people in the news talk so much about the things that we know are true as women, the patriarchy, misogyny. It's true. It's real. It has real life effects. It's been around since the biblical days. Like, there is misogyny. There is, in fact, patriarchy. There's no doubt about that. But there's also racism. And in our country, that has had a particular impact on the group that Mr. Majors belongs to. So it's sort of interesting to me. I wonder, when I see the term Darvo, I wonder, does it apply to people who were probably denying for the last 20 and 30 years of their life in prison that they had done something? Are they attacking the people who got them in prison? This latest story that just dropped today, the 19th of January, involved a crooked cop that was prosecuting people and arresting people who are not guilty. So when that person gets arrested and they're sitting in jail for 20 years and they're saying, I didn't do it, they're denying, okay, which is the first part of this acronym. And they're probably then attacking the people who put them in jail. And then I guess they're doing reverse victim when they say, hey, I'm really the victim here because I didn't do this and I'm serving a prison sentence that I shouldn't be serving. So I always wonder with some of these theories from some of these sociologists, how does real life victims of injustice fit into their equation?
He spent 16 years in prison after being wrongly convicted. His accuser, a best-selling author, is now apologizing, saying she's truly sorry. But how do you undo such a life-altering mistake? Here's Les Trent.
Tears of joy as a man wrongly accused of is exonerated after spending 16 years in prison. Anthony Broadwater, now 61 years old, broke down in tears when he heard the judge throw out the conviction.
Mr. Broadwater cannot get those 16 years back.
His accuser was Alice Sebold.
A man who was wrongfully imprisoned and at one point sentenced to death in Oklahoma is now free. This is 71-year-old Glenn Simmons, seen here with his lawyer and loved ones, reading an order from an Oklahoma judge declaring his innocence, a declaration that he's been waiting for 5 decades. Simmons spent a total of 48 years, 1 month, 18 days behind bars for a crime he did not commit.
It is interesting when you hear this acronym. I think about what the work of the Innocence Project is. And I think about all these news stories that we see every day. Some of these people in jail for 30 years, 40 years, and in some cases longer than that. And most of them Black males. I suspect that if they were in another demographic, if these were white women, for example, I think we would definitely notice the pattern, but I don't know. Is it attacking to raise your hand as an innocent person and say, I did not do this thing, and I'm going to fight for my freedom when what has happened to me is unjust. So I bring up the Guardian story because this story is just kind of your typical journalism. You throw it over to an academic. The academic is quoted throughout the story. You don't bother to get anybody on the other side of the story saying anything, like somebody who may be from, I don't know, the Innocence Project maybe. And then you just close the story and you have a narrative, right? And you're talking about why he chose GMA and it's a noticeable choice and this and that and the other, and this is a PR campaign. A lot of these PR campaigns, what you'll actually see is an appeal to convince liberal audiences that violence is okay. Really? Why in the F would anybody be trying to convince anybody that violence is okay? Violence is not okay. So, but in the narrative of this story, you have no pushback on these ridiculous statements. And even more interesting, Badera says he makes this really strong connection to the history of lynching Black men, but he brings it up for his own gain. So I guess Badera wants us to believe that misogyny and patriarchy matter in history, but racism and lynching doesn't matter in history. That's interesting. Why would one matter and not the other? But they're running a narrative. That's all they're doing. It's a narrative story. We're going to talk about this thing in this way, and that's what we're doing. And we don't really care about, there is no other side. It's just our side and our opinion. And that's what drives so much journalism today. It's really kind of lazy, actually, because nobody's actually checking the facts of these stories and looking at it from the standpoint of just reporting, okay, what happened. I don't know if the Guardian had a correspondent, a reporter in that courtroom or not. I really don't know, but it's interesting that was written. It's basically a piece written to say, how dare he deny, how dare he have a side, how dare he be able to talk. It's interesting. It really is. That's it. I'll be back very soon because there's a lot more to say on this and so much more.